So I want to talk about AI, not to argue against it, not to defend it, just literally share my honest opinion and what I stand as a working artist and educator. The reason I'm doing this video is because I think there's a lot in this conversation about AI and around this topic that misses something very, very important. I've been making characters and creatures for a very long time, and probably like most of you and most of the artists that I know, I've been paying close attention to what is happening around this whole generative AI and tools that can create or produce images very, very easily. Because let's face it, the image quality is very impressive. The speed is real and the accessibility is honestly remarkable. You know, like someone with literally no artistic training can produce something visually super convincing in just a matter of seconds. So I understand why artists feel the way they do and why they feel the pressure. And I also understand why someone perhaps, learning 3D right now might feel, a little bit like, why doing this, right? Or why even bother? Or is it worth studying 3D? Or is it worth learning a new software, a new tool? And I think that is a completely valid question. And I'd like to try to answer this honestly, and it is just an opinion. But here's the thing, and about any AI generative model or anything that can produce an image, it basically responds to a prompt or to prompts, right? And prompting, I think it's a skill. I'm not dismissing that, but the quality of what you get back from any of these modules depends entirely on how you prompt or the quality of what you put in, right? And to be honest, knowing what to put in those prompts, or at least having an understanding of what would be that input that you're doing, knowing what, what makes a silhouette work for a character, or what gives a character personality, what are those visual language traits that will make a specific character, a specific concept stand out, or why a design will read clearly over another one that doesn't. Those aren't really prompting skills. Those are design skills. And AI can generate a creature and it can produce, an amazing artwork that looks visually striking as soon as you see it, but it cannot tell you why the design works. It cannot help you make a deliberate choice about the shape, language, or the pose, or how that pose communicates a character's personality. It just produces results. It doesn't develop the thinking. I guess that's kind of like what I'm trying to say. And honestly, the artists that I see getting the most out of AI tools, or using them, let's say, well within the context of, creating something that is more meaningful, or at least using it with intention, those are artists, and in most cases, artists that already have a strong design foundation, or someone that already understand design quite well, because they know exactly what to ask for, or they know exactly what to tweak in a prompt, let's say, to produce something specifically. And more importantly, I think, they know when the result isn't good, right? And when the result, or the whatever the computer produces and gives you, they will be able to say, this is good enough, or knowing why this is not good enough and why there are certain things in the design that needs to be changed. Now, there's another argument that I've heard, and I think it's important to address it, which is I can just literally create hundreds of variations and hundreds of different types of images until I find the one that I like. And yes, you can totally do that, but something I like is doing a lot more work in that sentence. So it is not that simple. So if you don't have the vocabulary to know why you like it, if you cannot define what's working and how to push it further, then there's no intentionality. And that is very important, I think, because then you are curating, you're not creating. And I think that's a valid skill, but it's a different job altogether. The work that I find most satisfying when I create my stuff, and actually the most meaningful to people who see it, I think, comes from a place of intention, or there is a clear intentionality behind that design. Every design decision has a reason. So for instance, this is a concept that I created with my students from a past cohort of the Extra Mile, and it's called the Carnax. This shape of this cranial pod isn't random, right? It is based on a series of iterations and a research process that needed to be part of a specific narrative. So the posture as well of the creature tells you something about its personality, right? It's this very awkward sort of like humanoid creature, but it doesn't stand properly, it doesn't have like a proper posture. And that is all intentional because the story of this creature basically is a organism that lives inside this cranial pod. And it's kind of like a crustaceous type of creature that controls this human body and is trying to pretend to be more human than what it is, just an alien creature. So it doesn't have all the movement rights, it's just literally a puppet, but it's not the best puppeteer. That's kind of like the story, and that's why those design choices and everything around the visuals of this character make sense in the context of this story. So going back to the AI thing, the level of intentionality doesn't come with prompting or doesn't come from prompting. It comes from developing an eye for design or developing your taste for the design over time. Now, another argument or kind of like a workflow that I've seen other artists use with AI is that they use AI to finish their work or to polish their work. They probably will get a rough block out, something that they did in ZBrush, in 3D. They feed it into an AI tool and get it textured and lit up, and the result is great in just minutes. And honestly, that is a workflow that exists and some people are using it very effectively. So I think that's something that is already embedded into, let's say, their workflow to produce their artwork or their ideas. But here is what it trades away. And I think this is kind of like my main concern. You're giving away control. When AI makes all the texturing decisions and all the lighting decisions, there are any of those choices that are yours. You don't have any decision. And yeah, you could argue that your decision is in the way that you prompt or how you select certain things to change in the work. But if you think about it, when you have a client or an art director that will ask you to do something like, let's push this design in a specific mood or a specific direction, or let's change the material quality, something that would go with a specific story that they might be trying to communicate. And that could be something with the lighting, like how the lighting changes the perception of the story, right? Or the perception of the mood. And on a related note, you might notice that the lighting and the setup that I have, the mood, if you will, for this video is different from the other videos that I have on the channel. And that is because that's part of what I wanted to do. I wanted to create a slightly different mood to perhaps communicate a more reflective type of video or something that is different from the tutorials that I do, right? And that's something that I do intentionally. And it's the same thing that happens with the artwork. You are putting in, you're being intentional with your decisions. So going back to the working with, let's say, a client, if you're just prompting and you're just waiting for AI to come up with the results or give you the textures or give you the lighting, and you don't have the kind of like underlying knowledge of why certain things are happening or even why the result looks good to you, you're depending purely on luck and in iteration, like the thing that we mentioned earlier on, right? Like just give me 100 types of different images and then I will choose the one that I feel is best, or I might even send to the director 100 images and they will choose the best one. So again, you're depending on that luck, on iteration, rather than the craft of the artist. Now, there's another thing that is worth mentioning that I don't know how much weight it will have over time, but if you think about it, AI will tend, or any generative AI to produce images will tend to move towards the average of what looks good, right? Which means that everyone using the same workflow or the same AI tool is going to likely start to produce very similar work or the same work all the time, or something that feels very much the same. Because again, it's trying to produce that looks good average. So the artists that I think stand out nowadays are the ones whose work and the quality of their work has something that will make them unmistakably theirs. So you see something and you straight away know that, oh, that is from that artist, right? There's multiple examples of this, but that style and that visual language that an artist will, develop over time that comes from a deliberate choice that has been made over the years and over practice, right? So it just takes into account all that knowledge and the practice that that artist has done or gone through to produce something that looks very deliberate and that looks very unique to that artist or to the style of that artist. And I want to be very honest about all of this and about something specifically that often gets glossed over, or in sometimes with these type of conversations about AI, it just gets ignored. And it's basically a legitimate concern about entry-level jobs in the industry. I think like the most repetitive technical production work, think about basic cleanup of a 3D scan or a simple asset creation like a prop, or maybe certain type of UV work. Some of that is genuinely at risk, I think, and some of it is already changing. I don't know how much, but it is changing. And I don't think it helps anyone in this type of conversation to pretend otherwise, right? But the path I've always encouraged, and I think this is kind of like what keeps me grounded with these discussions of AI. And honestly, the reason why I build something like the Extra Mile program, for example, which is the course that I have online, and the reason I did it the way that I did it was never about training people to be fast in technical tasks or to be really, really quick at producing a bunch of like final art, right? It is more about helping artists develop their creative voice or like that sort of personal trademark style in a way, the design thinking, and what it takes to bring an original idea to life. That is really the reasoning behind, let's say, something like the course or something that I put out there, and the reason I keep creating tutorials and creating things for artists to learn the tools and to learn how to use them to create their own creatures and their own characters. That path, I think, is still open. And if anything, with so much generated content, flooding every single platform that you can think of, having a distinctive point of view and, work that is clearly and intentionally yours, I think it has become more valuable now, not less. So it is important to kind of like lean on that, I think. And then there is the issue that I think sits underneath all of this for a lot of artists, on a lot of digital artists, especially that I know. This is the issue that doesn't really get talked about much, or at least not directly, as directly as it should, I think. And that is that the models that power these tools, these AI generative tools, were trained on millions of images that, is work made by artists who were never asked, never credited, never compensated. And that's not a technical issue, that is an ethical one. And the anger that some artists feel about this, and I think it's completely legitimate, right? So I'm not going to tell you how the conversation ends because it hasn't ended yet. There are legal cases still being decided, policies that are being written, platforms making choices right now that will probably shape what happens next. And I genuinely don't know where this is going to land. What I do know is that the work that I make is mine, and every decision in it came from somewhere, right? From, like I've said before, from years of looking at things or researching things, of thinking about design and what design choices are best, or learning about the design principles and iterating, producing things and failing. That's probably one of the most important things. Failing so that I can learn and recognize certain things and try again, right? So this process of iteration and learning and failing and coming back and do things again, that builds something that no prompt can replicate. Not because it's, technically superior, but because it sort of carries a point of view that belongs to a person, or at least in this case, it carries my point of view. And I think that's one of the most valuable things. And not only that, I think that is still worth protecting and, still very much worth developing or like investing in it, right? So I'm not telling you to ignore AI. I personally use it myself, just not to make artwork. So I use AI tools to do research, to maybe organize my ideas, to refine the structure of something that I've written, to, automate certain things on my daily task. I think some tools are generally really good to help you reach a wider audience. So in between my thick English accent and the way that I tend to speak really, really fast, it might not be the most accessible language or content for most people, but there are AI tools that will translate for you and will those sort of things. So I believe certain things of AI are really helpful. And these are the type of tools that I think to perhaps introduce into the mix. And in general are things where it helps me think more clearly without replacing the creative choices that are mine to make. So I guess what I'm saying with this more kind of like reflective video is don't let the noise of this conversation talk you out of developing your own skills and your own creative voice. The question was never really about, can AI do what I do? The question is, and it should be, do you want to be the one making the decisions? And do you want to understand why something works the way it works? Do you want to create artwork that is truly yours or that it has kind of like your name on it? And if the answer is yes, then just keep going. The skills that you developed and that you build are yours. The thinking you develop is yours, and no tool, however impressive it is gonna take that away from you. And at the end of the day, most people doing this type of work that we do, they do it because they genuinely enjoy it. The process, the problem solving of a design challenge, the craft itself. So if that's you, protect that. I would say don't outsource your passion to a prompt.